would be silly to kind of ignore this right out of the gate, but you did participate in the first handful of WrestleManias. What are your recollections of when the WrestleMania concept came about and your participation in the first few?
I thought it was a fantastic idea. Instead of going all over the place, they could just bring the show to us. It kind of works out that way. I guess the next show they're going to have will probably be on the moon.
And what are some of your memories of those matches that you participated in? Number 2 against Randy Savage. Number 3, you were on the outside for Savage Steamboat. And then number 4, you were a part of the Battle Royal, kind of picking at some legs there. But what are some of your memories of those early matches?
Actually, you want the honest truth, or you want me to give you a lot of snow jobs?
I want the honest truth, with no room for those
matches.
snow jobs here.
They're just matches. I've had thousands of them, and they're just kind of following that. They were a match. They were decent matches. The show was pretty well done. It was a change in the wrestling history, honestly, and unfortunately, we'll never get back to what it was. So it's just a couple, 3 or 4 matches.
Now, one of your main big feuds was with the Macho Man Randy Savage. What are your thoughts on working with Randy, and what are your thoughts on Randy, as an individual?
Randy was very unique. He was a very dedicated talent. He worked very hard. He was very, very disciplined. Unfortunately, I think the biggest mistake that Randy ever made in his career was bringing his wife Liz into the business, because he was very jealous, and it made things pretty uncomfortable for himself and very often her also, and it led to a divorce, I think. He was an ultimate pro, honestly.
Now you're basically in Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's corner for WrestleMania 3. What were your thoughts on the Dragon, and what were your thoughts on that epic WrestleMania matchup?
You want to know the truth again?
Yes, of course.
I was really kind of angry that I was standing on the outside of a match in the Silver Dome in Pontiac, Michigan, which is about 12 miles from my house. I'd have much rather been involved in a match. There I was. It was a pretty decent match they had, but it's not where I wanted to be. Although it wasn't bad, standing in the other corner looking at Elizabeth, that was kind of neat.
Now, with basically being a part of that big boom period of wrestling in the 1980s, what was your take on, everything, the way it went down, and, how wrestling became basically mainstream and basically a part of the fabric and the culture of the way we were here in the States? I
have probably a totally different take on all that. I was never a wrestling fan, so that changes everything right from the get-go. 1962, I was making $4,300 a year teaching. I had 2 children, a third on the way. Obviously, I needed an income. And a friend of mine was a big, huge wrestling fan, and he talked me into calling a promoter one night, and I did. Went over to meet him the next day, and I started wrestling around Michigan with a mask on, called a student. And in the process of that, as I started learning what wrestling was all about, I had no clue what I was getting into. So when I found out that it was, predetermined, or however you want to call it, I thought that the business itself was challenging my integrity as an athlete. So I really didn't like it, to be honest with you. And then once I understood the art, and it is an art, of working a match and controlling the crowd and all the stuff that used to go into the business, I really started to like it and respect it a lot more. So by the time I got to, I was invited to, Bruno Sammartino was the world's WWF champion at the time. He came to Detroit. I was wearing my mask, and he had a match with Bulldog Brower, but he had an entourage with him, and they spotted me there and invited me to Pittsburgh. So when I go to Pittsburgh, I take my mask and that whole student stuff, cap and gown, and when I get there, they say, no, we don't want a masked man, we want you. I said, no, I don't want to use my real name, I'm a teacher and a coach, and I didn't feel it really fit that way, so somebody said, well, this is a Steele City, let's call him Jim Steele. I said, I like Steele. Somebody else said George. that part of my body is only about 48 years old now. That happened in 1967. From then on, I was in Pittsburgh the following year because we did great business in Pittsburgh and sold it out 2 or 3 times with Bruno. I was then invited to the WWF out in the Northeast, and my first show was in Boston and New York and Philadelphia, and we had great crowds. We did a lot of great business, so I was invited back the second year. I didn't have a manager. I did my own talking and was pretty good at it. And then about the third year, they didn't know that it was going to be, they didn't invest a manager in me because they didn't know if I was going to be coming back, or, I didn't either. Once I really started getting over, they decided that they wanted to have a manager for me so that they could talk when I'm back in school teaching and coaching. And so we went along with that, and it worked out great for a long time. And then at one point, Vince McMahon Jr., basically back then I was working for his dad, Vince McMahon Sr., when Jr. come out of the scene, we were doing some interviews one day, and he said, I was doing my articulate interview, and he said, no, you're making too much sense for an animal. So I went into the stupid stuff. He said, that's what we want. And so I was stuck with stupid stuff for the rest of my career, which made a lot of money, by the way, but it really did handicap things too, to a point. But I always had a pretty articulate manager with me, so it worked out fine. But that's how that all came together. It's kind of crazy. And back then, Steve, our business back then was TV was strictly done to advertise the arena shows, which really made a lot of sense back then. And you sold your business in the arenas and promoted it on television. Now they do the whole package. They kind of really do everything on television, and it's totally changed the business. So the psychology part of it that I used to really enjoy doing is not part of it anymore. It's a totally different business, one that has been done very well, but it's just not the foundation that I enjoyed.
And it's actually... I'm sorry, John. Go right ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say you mentioned Bruno, which we'll definitely get into, but I was just really curious about who actually trained you. I know you said he was up in the Michigan area, but who was actually your trainer?
Bert Ruby was the promoter. He sent me to a gym in Windsor, Ontario with Gino Brito and 4 or 5 other wrestlers. And what they did back then, they'd take you to the gym, give you some pretty heavy calisthenics, get you in shape kind of talk, and then one by one they'd take you in the ring and beat you up. Well, as my book explains, fighting was my big deal back then, and so very quickly they realized that they better show me the nature of the business, so that beating up quit real quick, because everything they did to me, I gave them a receipt, and so they started showing me how to work the business, and eventually I became a very good worker. That's why I was able to, a lot of people don't realize this, but back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, I was was the very top brawling heel, vicious brawling heel in the history of the WWF and then later on the WWF. And as things changed in about 1984, 85, I went to that cartoon character, kind of like a special ed kid or something like that. Which made out very well because the business was changing. We weren't selling wrestling the way we had. We were now selling T-shirts and action figures and everything else. So to be a kind of a halfway baby face really worked out, fine financially.
Yeah, and with that you had, like you said, you were such a dastardly feared heel in the early 70s and the mid-70s when you would go into the Madison Square Garden shows, and the difference between the 2 decades, the character is just it's unparalleled because you had a very tough as nails persona and also then playing the cartoonish animal character. But could you talk about how the origin of the foreign object came to be and when you decided to bring that into your arsenal of tricks?
Well, I had a very dear friend that was very good with a foreign object. And I watched him do that a few times. And Mike, I'm talking about the Baron Mike Cicluna, was a master with a foreign object. I watched what he was doing. I was visiting in Japan. I was, on a wrestling tour. I was in a bar, and they had this real heavy, flat, heavy steel bottle opener. And I said, "Let me see that." And I said, "Could I have that?" And so the Japanese like to give you gifts. Anyhow, they give me the bottle opener. So I put tape on it, and I used it that night in Japan and started a riot. So I brought it back with me into the United States, and that was my foreign object. It was a real deal. You could knock somebody out with it, to be honest with you. And the funny thing is, the reason I call it a foreign object is because it was from Japan. So it was a real foreign object. A lot of guys use, I don't know, tongue depressors and stuff like that, but mine was a foreign object. And I would hide it from the referee, and I'd tell referees, if you ever see my foreign object, disqualify me. Now that does two things. That does three things. First of all, it makes me work harder to make sure the referee never sees it. It makes the referee work a little harder trying to see it. And in all reality, it makes the referee look stupid because he can't see it. So
yeah,
it becomes crowd participation. Everybody in the arena, I'm showing it to everybody in the arena, but my body's always between me and the referee. So everybody sees it but the referee. I zap their, Strongbow, Bruno, or whoever with the foreign object, and the people see me do it. So they're telling the referee what I did, and everybody in the arena is trying to tell the referee, now he's trying to find it, and I'm playing hide-and-go-seek with him. Kind of like back in the classroom, with kids, with their rubber bands and spitballs and stuff. But it really got over, big time.
Which actually, ironically, it could work too in your babyface character, and just use the reverse for the referee to look even more like an idiot, because now the fans are cheering for George to pull out the foreign object.
Exactly.
So now, could you tell us a little bit about going to Japan at that point of your career? What was the crowd like, and how were those first tours of Japan for you?
They were all right. The Japan was a little bit different. They respect people a little bit differently than they do here. They're very, very conservative. Instead of booing you or calling you names, they just start whistling when they get mad. So it's kind of strange that way. And I, in Japan, drove everybody nuts, including the promoters. I would usually, the main events, they'd have a flower girl give you flowers, and you're supposed to go give it to the most beautiful girl at ringside. Well, I'd find the oldest, toothless sweetheart out there and give her the flowers. And then I would chase all the young girls with my look. I'd chase them all over the place. In Japan, I had a lot of fun, to be honest with you. They see you every day on TV in Japan. So in the stores there, they might have, let's say in a department store, they might have, where we'd have one or two people behind the counter, they might have 5 or 6 just because of the numbers of their country. And I'd get about 8 feet away, and I'd just stop and look at them with a crazy look and make one move like I was going to run that way. And these gals would dive out. They'd run all over the store. So I entertained myself that way. The business itself over there was pretty unique. I had a lot of fun with that, too. It was good. I love wrestling in the States a whole lot more, to be honest with you.
Now, in the 70s, you were basically, as you mentioned, you were a monster heel. And was it strange also being a coach and a teacher during basically the same time period as you were that big monster heel?
No. I can tell you this right now. I wrote this book, Animal, and I look at it, writing the book, I started looking at my life through the rear view mirror of life. Because everything was happening. In fact, I feel kind of embarrassed. I'm pretty egotistical. I thought, boy, am I doing some great things. But after I started writing the book and seeing what all happened in my life, I realized that God was in control before I was. And it was just amazing how things worked out. Nothing was planned. Everything just worked out the way that I guess it should. What was your question to me just a second ago?
Was it strange being a coach and a teacher, but also being a monster heel at the same time? Okay, I was telling you, I looked through the rearview mirror, and God is in control.
I lived and taught in Madison Heights, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. the WWF and the WWF TV never came into the Detroit area. So when I was out there doing the Georgie Animal Steel thing, the kids back in Madison Heights never saw me doing it. They only saw me as a student, and they didn't know it was me with a mask on in Detroit, which is kind of neat. Now, occasionally, because kids from the Northeast would move into Madison Heights occasionally, and they would recognize me. And this is kind of funny. I think it's cute. So every once in a while, I'd see a kid with one of the wrestling magazines or a program from the Northeast with a group of kids around him, Madison Heights kids, and he's showing them a picture of this wrestler. Me. So finally they'd get enough nerve, they'd come and say, "This is you, you're a pro wrestler." And I take the picture and look and say, "Well, I guess he kind of looks like me a little bit. Do you really think I'm that ugly?" That's what they're going to say. And so every once in a while when that happened, that's how I worked my way through that. They never really saw me wrestle in Detroit until 1984, I think it was. I was in a Madison Square Garden show on a Saturday night, and then Monday I was at football practice, and I had 90 kids lined up, for calisthenics, and no one had ever said anything to me about being a wrestler out west, other than the programs and the ha-ha. And so when we did our first set of calisthenics, then we broke down for like a jumping jacks, or some people call it a side straddle hop. 90 green tongues came out. So I was caught. The following year, our football team was undefeated. That was the last year that I coached, 1985. And then in January of '86 is when I left teaching full time and came to the Northeast. Now a lot of people thought that I taught for a couple of years and my whole career was wrestling. My career in wrestling was part-time until 1986. And then I retired permanently in 1989, really. Well, I come back and did a few other things with the WWF because I was an agent and it was just handy to do a few things for them. But, basically I was a full-time coach and teacher, a part-time wrestler, and on top in the biggest industry, in the biggest company in the industry, in the world, the WWF and WWF, and I'm doing main events and going back and doing my teaching stuff. And people didn't even know it because of the difference in the TV. Isn't that kind of strange?
Very.
It's definitely.
Tell me, God,
definitely
what's the
strange.
control of that one? If they'd have saw me what I was doing in the 70s, if the school board would have saw that, they'd have fired me.
Yeah, they could have questioned any kind of disciplinary practices at that point. But kind of just sticking with your teaching and your coaching career, what did you enjoy the most about teaching and coaching wrestling and football?
I loved coaching wrestling because it's really a sweat-on job. You're working with kids individually, and it's an individual sport, and we had a tremendous program, which means wasn't that I was a great wrestling coach, I had great kids. We started a program in 1967, January 66, 67, not January, 66, 67, and 69 we won the state championship. So that tells you the kind of kids we had. We had no Little League program or anything like that. So I just had great kids. And I love that a lot. The football, you get to call the plays and do that kind of thing. It's more good it was better for my ego, but I think that I did a better job helping kids grow up as a wrestling coach, to be honest with you. But I was humbled a couple of years ago. I got a phone call telling me that they wanted to name the stadium after me where I coached, and I said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah, we're kind of excited about it." I said, "Well, I wouldn't do that." They said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, I don't think anyone should be honored like that until after they're dead, because we always have we can still screw up." And they said, "Well, we'd like to take part in it. We're going to do it anyhow, but we'd like to take part in it." And I did, and it was really humbling. Again, I look back at my faith that I didn't have when I was teaching and coaching. I wish I would have, that I have in Jesus Christ that I didn't have back then. And So when I was at the ceremony, I gave the credit to where it belonged. It wasn't to me, certainly.
Now you can see that if you go to your Twitter account, you actually see that cool picture of the Jim Meyer Stadium in the background. Very cool. Very cool to be able to have something named after you like that.
Well, you know, I have a lot of people that go through my website at GeorgeTheAnimalSteele.com just to surprise them because, you know, a lot of people still don't think I know how to talk. I was in a bar years ago, and somebody come up and said something. I said, "How you doing?" "You talk." I mean, so, you know, it's a crazy business out there.
Now, one thing, being a fan of yours for years, I got to ask, how did you get those green tongues?
Well, you know, today, the WWE, they sit down and they come up with all these different kinds of ideas and gimmicks and all that stuff. We didn't do that back then. What happened was I'd had a couple of drinks at a TV show, and I didn't want them to know it, the promoters or anybody, so I put some florets in my mouth and went on television. Now, this is back in the early 70s, late 60s, and color TV had just come out. Looking back through that rearview mirror of my life, it just come out, so here's this clown out there with a green tongue. I didn't even know it was green. I was just getting rid of the breath. And so the switchboard lit up. Why? They thought their TVs were messed up, I think. And so about 3 months later, I said to myself, I'm going to do that green tongue thing again for my own laugh. You know what I mean? And I did it again, and the place went nuts again, and they had signs the next day all over the arenas with green tongues hanging out. So from then on, I had the very best breath in wrestling. But we never came up with it. It just happened. Then I'm always asked, why did you eat the turnbuckle? How'd you come up with that silly thing? And same thing, this is black and white TV, Pittsburgh, 1967, I think it was. They used to give away different gifts to get fans to come to the TV show for our promotion. And this one particular time, they'd given away these little satin couch pillows that they used to have back in the 70s, 60s. And they'd give away about 40, no, that's not right, about 250 of them. So it's studio wrestling, and one of the ladies got mad at me. She threw her pillow at me. So I got the pillow in the ring. What am I going to do with it? I could throw it back, and there's going to be 350 whatever pillows come back at me. I can sit on it. It's going to be boring. Or I can take a bite out of it. So I took a bite out of it. And it tore and it popped. It was so packed with the stuffing, it just kind of exploded. So I started throwing the stuffing in the air. It was coming down, trickling down, and sticking in my hair like I was a Donald snowman. And then I took the pillow and put it over my opponent's head and started choking him. Really looking at that camera, vicious stuff. And I pulled the pillow off, and he was blue because the stuffing was lighter than air. I had the pillow over his head, so every time he breathed, the stuffing was going down his lungs. It almost killed him. So I go to the dressing room, and the guys are all laughing. Oh, you almost killed that guy, the way wrestlers used to be. And then somebody said, well, that would be great if you get somebody to throw a pillow at you every night. That was fantastic. And somebody else, I think it was Bruno's wrestling cousin, I can't even think of his name right. Tony Marino. And he said, maybe you could tear the turnbuckles. Everybody laughed. 2 or 3 weeks later, I was wrestling Strongbow. And it's hard to have a boring match with Strongbow, but people are just not reacting in this match. So I looked at the corner, the turnbuckle pad. I thought, I wonder. I went over and took a bite out of it. It tore real easy. I started rubbing his eyes in that. From a very flat match, we had a riot. So the two things I'm known for really is a green tongue and a turnbuckle. They both happened by accident. And just from the pillow being torn to tearing a turnbuckle, till my career was developed into a strange career that people still talk about. They remember the strange things. Some of the great matches that people have, they don't even remember anymore, but they remember the green tongue, they remember the turnbuckle, and even